We are in Parshas Vayeshev. Vayeshev is about retirement. Yaakov wanted to retire. He sat back and he said, you know what? I've had a long time being pursued by my brother. I've had 14 years learning in Shem Va'eva's yeshiva. I had 20 years with Lavan, as we learned last week, the week before, how Lavan was not very nice to Yaakov. He comes back and he spends 2 years getting back to his father. And he says, you know what? Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz megurei aviv be'eretz Canaan. Yaakov settled in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. Yaakov wanted to sit back, in our terms, put up his feet, sip on a pina colada, and relax. And Hashem said that's not the way the Jewish people do things. We never retire from life. We don't sit back. I mean, I'm saying this very, very tongue-in-cheek. Yaakov never wanted to sit back and put his feet up and have a pina colada, but he wanted to sit down and learn and just take the pressure off and just focus on Hashem. Hashem says, no, there's lots of things that are still going to happen in your life, and you need to keep focusing on life. You might change, and there's one message in that in terms of retirement. That is, when we retire, don't stop. Exactly right. Don't stop. Stop doing the work you were doing or whatever, but keep your brain and your body active, because that is the way we keep going. One of the ways, anyway. And so the Torah then says, well, okay, so these are Ele Todos Yaakov. These are the generations, the chronicles of Yaakov. Yosef ben Shiva Esrei Shana. Yosef was 17 years old. So Yaakov, remember last week we had Yaakov had 12 sons. We listed them out at the end of towards the end of the Parsha. Yaakov's got 12 sons, and suddenly he's saying, well, guess what? These are the chronicles of Yaakov, Joseph. And we all know the story of Joseph. We've all seen Andrew Lloyd Webber's amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, which I don't remember it exactly. I saw it when I was very much younger. But from memory and from thinking of some of the songs, because those are very catchy tunes, they probably got it reasonably right in terms of our understanding and Chazal and the Rishonim and other rabbis' explanations on the words in the Parsha and how we understand the words in the Parsha. And that's really what I want to focus on today. So what I want to do is go through the Parsha very quickly. This is the beginning of the transfer of power from Yaakov to Yosef, and getting Yosef going down to Egypt, and then essentially we've moved from Abraham to Yitzchak to Yaakov, and now we're going to the 12 tribes. And Yosef being one of the leaders of the tribes. We know that when Mashiach comes, there's a concept of Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach the son of Yosef, and then ultimately Mashiach ben David from the house of Yehuda, from David. There will be the Mashiach for all times. But Yosef has a part in the leadership of the Jewish people in those times, throughout history. The temple was in Binyamin's territory. Binyamin was connected to Yosef. They were brothers, full brothers. And so there's this whole connection to Yosef in leadership. And that's really what's being set up in this week's Parsha. So we all know that Yosef, the Torah tells us, was 17. We all know he was a shepherd. They were all shepherds. He was young. And he used to hang out with his brothers from Bilhah and Zilpah. They were all similar aged. Most of Leah's sons were a little bit older. Now, we're saying a little bit older. There was, 10, 12 years between all of them. But they were older. They were different. And he hung out with Bilhah and Zilpah's sons, the 4 other brothers. Binyamin was much younger than him. So, he wasn't ready to play footy with, I'm talking about Yosef and the Shvatim. They didn't play footy, don't worry. But he was with them. But the Torah says, Vayave Yosef es dibasam ra'a el avihem, and he would bring evil reports about them to his father. And then it says that V'Yisrael ahav es Yosef mikol banav ki ben zakunim hu, that Yosef was loved by Yaakov, for Israel loved Yosef more than all his other sons because he was a child of his old age. Interesting enough, it's not going to touch on it, it's mentioned, but it doesn't mention Binyamin because Binyamin was even younger. But Binyamin's birth was in tragedy, as we learned last week, because Rachel died while she was giving birth. And then he made him a katonas pasim, a coat of many colors, we all know. We discussed that last year. I'm not going to go into too much this year, but we'll come back to that. A fine woolen tunic is how Art Scroll translates it in the Stone Chumash. Just want to see what they say here. Fine woolen tunic. Okay. Then Yosef starts having dreams. And Yosef has a dream that he told his brothers, and they hated him even more. He says, listen to my dream. We were binding sheaves in the middle of the field, and behold, my sheaf stood up and remained standing, and your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf. And his brother said, what, you're going to be the king over us? You're going to reign over us? Well, that actually did happen. And then they hated him even more because of his dreams. And then he dreamt another dream, 2 dreams. And his other dream was related to his brothers. He told his brothers, and he says, listen, I dreamt another dream. The sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. And they said, what are you dreaming now? Yaakov says to him, actually, hang on, what's going on? Am I and your mother supposed to come with your brothers and bow down to you? The sun, the moon, father, mother, 11 stars, your 11 brothers going to bow down to you? His mother was dead. And so what is going on here? And his brothers were jealous of him. And then, end of Rishon, it ends, Haviv Shamar es Hadavar. His father kept this in mind, is the way we translate it. His father remembered this dream and said, hang on, there's something about this. We need to just remember this. Very, very famous words used by people over the ages in different scenarios. His brothers had gone to Shechem. Remember, Shechem was where his sister Dinah was violated in last week's Parsha. And they were pasturing the father's flock. And Yisrael comes to Yosef. Remember that Yaakov, Hashem renamed him Yisrael, and the names are interchangeable. We use both Yisrael and Yaakov for Yaakov Avinu. It says to his son Yosef, listen, your brothers are in Shechem. I'm going to send you to them. And Yosef says, Hineni, here I am. Whenever we have this Hineni, it's a common theme. We had Hashem calls on Abraham to take his son, his only son, and Yaakov. Abraham says, Hineni. It's like, I'm here. I'm ready to do what you want, Hashem. And he's telling his father, I'm ready to do what you want, Father. We're actually discussing yesterday how things have changed in this generation, where children call their parents by their first name, where, we don't look up to parents like we used to in most cases around the world today. Today's generation of children are very far away from where they were not that long ago. And he says, please go and look out for your brothers. Now, he knows the hatred that the brothers have got for Yosef. And he knows that Yosef is potentially going to be in trouble, but he sends him to go and check out on their welfare. And he sent him, and off Yosef goes, and he gets to Shechem. And then the Torah says, a man discovered him, and behold. Remember when the Torah says, Vihine, behold, it's something unexpected. And we had a few Vihines in the dream, and now another one. And behold, this man encountered him, and he was lost in the field. And the man said to him, what do you seek? And he says, my brothers, please tell me where they're pasturing. Now, he didn't say who he was. Now, we assume Yaakov was well known in the region. Could have said, I'm a son of Yaakov. He assumed this man knew. And the man said to him, they've journeyed on from here, because I heard them saying they're going to a place called Dotan. So Yosef went after them, and he found them in this place called Dotan. They saw him from afar, and he hadn't really approached. And the way the Torah describes it, they conspired against him to kill him, is the way the Art Scroll translates it. And they said to one another, look, the dreamer's coming. Here comes the dreamer. So let us get up and kill him, throw him into one of the pits, and we'll say that a wild beast devoured him. and then what will become of his dreams? They were worried that these dreams would come true, that they're going to bow down to him. Reuven heard what was going on, and Reuven said, no, hold on a minute. We're not going to kill our brother. It's not on. So Reuven said, we're not going to shed his blood. Throw him in the pit. Don't put a hand on him. And Torah says straight away, Reuven intended to come and rescue him and return him to his father. When Yosef came to his brothers, they took away his tunic, his fine woolen tunic that was on him. They took him and they threw him in a pit. And interesting enough, it says, I'll just read the Hebrew. V'habor reik ein bo mayim. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Why does the Torah say it was empty and there was no water in it? If it was empty, there wouldn't be water in it. So what's this emptiness and water? I'll come back to all of these questions. Okay. Yosef, they sit down. So then the brothers sit down to break bread. They eat bread. And they look up, and behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites is coming. And they're coming from Gilad. And they got camels with spice and balsam and lotus and other fine smelling things. So Yehuda, Yehuda's going to become the king, King David from Shevet Yehuda. Yehuda says, listen, what's the point of killing him and covering over his blood? Let's sell him. So let's sell him to the Ishmaelites, not put our hand on him, and he's our brother at the end of the day. We can't kill our own brother. And so the brothers agreed. Then and I remember they were talking about Ishmaelites. Then it says Midianites, traders passed by. They drew Yosef up, lifted him from the pit, and they sold Yosef to the Ishmaelites. We get a little confused here. For 20 pieces of silver, they brought Yosef to Egypt. Reuven then comes back. Now, where's Reuven been? Why wasn't he in this whole discussion? Reuven comes back, and Reuven says, hang on, what's going on? Behold, Hine, Yosef is not in the pit. He's gone. So he tore his garments. Returning to his brother, he said, the boy's gone. Where can I go? What's going on? So then they all took Yosef's garment, as we all know. They slaughtered a goat, dipped the tunic in blood, and they sent the tunic to their father, and they said to him, we found this, identify it if you please. Hakerna, please identify this. If it's your son's or not. He recognized it. He says, my son's tunic. A savage beast has devoured him. Yosef has surely been torn to bits. Yaakov tore his garments. Second tearing of garments now. Put on sackcloth on his loins, and he mourned for his son for many days. And his sons and his daughters got up to try and comfort him. But he refused. He refused to be comforted. Remember that word. Because I'm going to go down to the grave mourning for my son. Now, the Midianites, we had Ishmaelites, Midianites, Medanites, had sold Yosef to good old Potiphar. And he was a courtier in the chamberlain of the butchers, whatever that means, in Egypt. So we had Ishmaelites, Midianites, Medanites, in and out and in. We'll come back to all of this. Okay, and that ends Shlishi. We come to Revi'i. I'm not going to go through this in any detail. The whole chapter 38, section Revi'i, is 30 verses. 30 verses discussing Yehuda and Tamar. I'll just very briefly touch on it. Yehuda, after this whole episode, was kind of shunned by his brothers. He's the leader of what's going on, and he's pushed out. So Yehuda goes and he hangs out with an Adulamite man, and they go into business together. His name was Chira. Yehuda saw a prominent merchant. He married his daughter Shua. They got married. They had 3 sons. Along comes his first son Er, and Yehuda marries him to a woman called Tamar. Er, the Torah says, sinned. He wasted seed because he didn't want Tamar was absolutely beautiful, and he didn't want her to fall pregnant and have children and ruin her beauty. So therefore, he never slept with her in a normal way, and therefore Hashem took his life. So the custom, as we still have today, well, we don't do this today, but if a male dies without having children and he's got a brother, there is a concept of yibum where the brother marries the wife to perpetuate the brother's name. We do something different. The Torah gives you two options. We don't do yibum. We do, in English, they call it levirate marriage. We do chalitza, whereby we free the woman through a process in Beis Din that she can marry anybody else after that, except for a kohen, because a kohen's not allowed to marry a divorcee, and this is a form of divorce. So rabbinically, a kohen's not allowed to marry a woman who's gone through chalitza. One of the reasons brought why we don't do yibum anymore is because it's a mitzvah. And a brother is not necessarily going to marry his brother's wife l'shem shemaim, for the sake of heaven. He might do it out of lust or whatever, but the rabbis said no. And also because we don't, if the brother's married, we're not allowed to have two wives anymore, and therefore we don't do that. Okay, so second son Onan did the same thing. And so now Yehuda's worried, and he says, you know what, I'm not going to, I've got a third son, but he's young. So he says to Tamar, go back to your father's house, and when my son is old enough, we'll work it out. We'll do it. We'll go through Yibum then. So Yehuda's out, and Tamar decides this is not acceptable. She does something incredible, and she says, you know what, I need to be part of this family. And she arranges that she would sleep with Yehuda without him knowing who she is, and she falls pregnant. And it's told to Yehuda, by the way, your daughter-in-law who is waiting for your son is now pregnant. It must be that she's acting as a harlot. And so Yehuda holds a Beis Din and he sentences her to death. And she comes along, and being the modest woman that she is, she will not say, hang on, Yehuda, it's you. But she says, do you recognize this signet and the staff, your signet wrap and staff that were here? These were the person who made me pregnant. That wasn't the owner. And Yehuda owned up. The same words Yehuda used to Yaakov, Hakernar, do you recognize this? Are the words that she used for him. There's a lot of pairs in this Pasha. I've alluded to a few of them already. And so the whole long story, and eventually she has twins, and she has Peretz and Zerach, and that is the history of King David. The Davidic dynasty through Yehuda comes through Peretz. It comes through on the other side. Remember, some weeks ago we learned about Avram's nephew Lot and his two daughters that he slept with. Ammon and Moab were their children. That was Rus the Moabite. And from that one side, and this is from this side is Yehuda. The Davidic dynasty starts off tainted on both the paternal and maternal sides. In a way to show us that it doesn't matter where we've come from. We can get to the place we need to go by working on ourselves. Somebody who's born into a family of great rabbis for generations and generations, and the whole family are connected and they know what's going on, needs to still work on themselves. And somebody who's born into a family who are completely assimilated needs to work on themselves to get close to Hashem. We all need to work on ourselves. And that's just showing us some way. And that's just an interlude in the middle of the Parsha. We at the fourth Aliyah at Revi, and we come to Chamishi, and we go back to Yosef. Yosef Hurad Mitzrayim. Yosef was brought down to Mitzrayim. He was working for Potiphar, who was the chief butcher, I guess we could call him, for Paro. He had purchased him from the Ishmaelites, who had brought him down there. No, Ishmaelites, Midianites, all mixed up. Okay. All the ites, we're in English, yes. As opposed to isms in our time, maybe, I don't know. Okay, and so Yosef became successful. He remained in the house of his Egyptian master. His master perceived that Hashem was with him, and whatever he did, Hashem made him succeed. Yosef found favor in his eyes, and suddenly Yosef was the head honcho of the house. Yosef was in charge. And then we have the whole story with Potiphar's wife. Happened from that time that he appointed him in his house, and his wife saw how phenomenally handsome Yosef was. It happened from that time, at that point in time. She cast her eyes over Yosef, and she kept saying to him, lie with me, lie with me, lie with me. He adamantly refused. Vayima'en. The same word his father refused to mourn for him, brought here. And he says, he adamantly refused. He said to his master's wife, look, with me here, my master concerns himself about nothing in the house, whatever he has placed in my custody. There's no one greater in his house than I. He's denied me nothing but you. Since you're his wife, how can I perpetuate this great evil? And so it was, and she coaxed him every day, it says, day after day, so he would listen. And he'd lie beside and be with her. And then there was an opportune moment when nobody was in the house. He came inside to do his work. No one in the household was there. She caught him by his garments, screaming at him, lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand and ran out, and he went outside. When she saw that he'd left, she said, she called out, hang on, this Jew boy, this Hebrew, Ivri, tried to sport with us. See, this is not on. He's trying to do something. So she kept his garment beside her. And when the master came home, she told him that this Hebrew slave you brought came to sport with me, as we translate it euphemistically. But it happened when I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment and ran outside. No, Potiphar wasn't very happy. So he took Yosef and threw him in jail. Can you imagine Egyptian jails? Don't know if you saw the video of the Syrian... No, sorry, not Syrian. The Hamas jail and what they did to their own people. Throwing a guy down the stairs and someone in solitary. Horrific. Right? And we need to dub them for our people that they've got, because I'm sure they're not going to be treating them nicely if they treat their own people like that. Okay, and then Yosef was in jail, and he was put in charge of jail. He became head honcho of the jail. Whatever he did, Hashem made him successful. Hashem in everything here. And it happened, Vayehi, again, suddenly it happened after these things that the butler and the baker did something against Paro, and they were thrown in jail. Paro was angry with them. They came to jail. The two of them dreamt a dream. Each of them had his dream on the same night, each one according to the interpretation of his dream. The cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison. Whatever that sentence means. That verse, it's a little bit confusing. Well, I'll try and come back to piece all of this together. So Yosef saw them in the morning, and v'hinei, he saw they were aggravated, they were grieved. So he said to them, why do you look so sad? What's going on? He's triaging them. He's doing mental health work here. He's like serious mental health triage. Yeah, absolutely. So they said, we dreamt a dream and no one can interpret our dream for us. So Yosef says, hang on, don't dream interpretations belong to Hashem. Tell me, if you please. He didn't say he will interpret. He said, just tell me your dreams. So the butler tells his dream to Yosef, and he says to him, in my dream, v'hinei, behold, there was a grapevine in front of me. On the grapevine were 3 tendrils, and though it budded, the blossoms bloomed and clusters ripened into grapes. Paro's cup was in my hand. I took the grapes, pressed them into Paro's cup, placed the cup in Paro's palm. So Yosef says to him, this is interpretation. 3 tendrils are 3 days. In another 3 days, Paro will lift up your head and will restore you to your post. You will place Paro's cup in his hand as you formerly did when you were the cupbearer. If only you would think of me with yourself when he benefits you, and you will do me a kindness. If you please mention me to Paro, then you would take me out of this building. For I was kidnapped for the land of Hebrews, and I've done nothing wrong, and I've been thrown in this dungeon. Then the baker saw that he interpreted well. So he said to Yosef, I too in my dream, behold, 3 wicker baskets were on my head, another v'hinei, and in the uppermost basket were all kinds of Paro's food, baker's handiwork. Birds were eating from them, from the basket above my head. So Yosef responded, this is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Paro will lift your head and hang you on a tree. Birds will eat from your flesh. So he's going to lift up the head of the butler and take off, so to speak, the head of the baker. It was on the third day. It was Paro's birthday. That's where we learned to make a birthday party from, maybe. That he made a feast. There you go. No, maybe that's why Jewish people shouldn't make birthday. No, I didn't say that. The Lubavitcher Rebbe was very big on birthdays. He was like, you need to have an aliyah on your birthday, on your Hebrew birthday, or at least on the Shabbos before, or whenever. But it is a big thing. Make a feast for all his servants. He counted the chamberlain, the cupbearers, the butler, and the bakers amongst his servants. He restored the butler to his cupbearing. He placed the cup on Paro's arm, but he hanged the chamberlain of the bakers, just as Yosef had interpreted to them. V'lo zachar sarha mashkim es Yosef vayishkachehu. But the chamberlain of the cupbearers, the butler, did not remember Yosef. He forgot him. End of the Parsha. We're left hanging. Now, we all know the rest of the story, but you come to shul, you've never heard this before, and you think, what on earth is going on here? So, let me tell you a little story that somebody told me on Shabbos, and we will try and make a little bit of understanding. I'm still not available. We try and make some understanding of what's going on. The friend of mine said his son goes to university, and he's got a non-Jewish boy, very, very religious Christian, who is very interested in Judaism and would like to just come and understand something about what happens. What do you do on the Sabbath? So they invited him to come for Shabbos dinner. He went last week to Minyan for Friday night davening, and Friday night then came back to the house, and my friend said to this boy, you can ask me anything you like. I don't know that I can answer, but feel free to ask anything. So this kid asked a very simple question, and I'll try and ask it the way he did, the way I was told he did, so now it's third hand, but I think my friend gave me a good story, and I've done a whole lot of research to try and piece it all together. He did all the research for me because, we discussed it on Shabbos. So the boy says, please explain to me why. In the book of Exodus, it says you shall roast the Pesach offering, the Paschal lamb. In the book of Deuteronomy, it says you should boil it. And in Chronicles, King Josiah cooked it, roasted it, and boiled it. Please explain this contradiction. So Stephen says, huh? Okay, so he looked up the book of Shmos, of Exodus, where we're given the mitzvah of the Pesach offering. And I'm going to go through all of this. And he looked up Devarim in Parshas Vayeshev, where it goes through the Parshas. And he said to this kid, where in Chronicles about King Josiah? Because unfortunately, we've got Tanakh, which is Torah, Nevi'im, Kesuvim. The Torah part we know pretty well. Nevi'im, the prophecies, we generally don't know so well, and Christians know it much better than most Jewish people. The Kesuvim, the writings, most of us know it reasonably well because it's the book of Esther and the book of Ruth and Tehillim. And so we know these things reasonably well. We read a lot of them on the Yom Tovs, and it's pretty good. But the book of Chronicles is one of those ones that most people don't get to look at. If you're a girl and you go to Sem, you generally are privileged enough to go through Tanakh. That's a lot of the focus in a lot of the Sems is on Tanakh, which is phenomenal. In Yeshiva, the focus tends to be on Gemara, and we miss out on a lot of these things. And so we do have parts of, certainly in Nevi'im, we do in Haftorahs, and King Yoshiyahu is mentioned, is one of the Haftorahs we read, and so the story we know, which I'm going to go through now. But so what I thought I would do is let's look at what is going on. So let's start from Rashi, because Rashi gives us the simple understanding of the verse. And so just for the next half hour or so, hopefully it won't take us much longer than that, I want to go through what this connection with Pesach is. And I'm going to connect it into the Parsha and just explain this whole misinterpretation in some versions of the Christian Bible and then go back to the Parsha and just work through some of the Rashis in the Parsha to try and get a little bit of a deeper understanding of some of the things in this story, that we all know the story. So let's just start at the beginning of this week's Parsha, Vayeshev, to make a connection to the Pesach offering. So Rashi says, if I can find it, on verse 3, Yisrael ahev es Yosef mikol banav. Yisrael loved Yosef more than his other sons. Ki ben zakunim hu, he was a child of his old age. Loi, va'asa loi ketonis pasim, and he made for him a fine woolen tunic, as we discussed. So what does Rashi say? Pasim, fine wool. L'shon kli milas. This garment of fine wool, kamo karpas v'techeles. It's like karpas and techeles. Karpas and turquoise wool. U'chamoi kasones hapasim, like the fine woolen tunic. Demasan va'amoin, Tamar va'amoin, in the incident of Tamar and Amnon, which was King David's son and daughter. The whole story, different Tamar, not the one from our Parsha there. And then he says, Midrash, Agadic Midrash. Agadic Midrash. Midrash is a book written at the same time as the Mishnah. The rabbis of the Mishnah wrote the Midrashim to explain the Torah. Just stories around how to understand what was going on in the Torah. So it uses the word pasim to describe Yosef's tunic. Al Shem Tzarasa, because of his troubles. Shenimka le Potiphar, he was sold to Potiphar. Ula Socharim, and to merchants, to Ishmaelim and to Ishmaelites, and Midianim and Midianites. That answers some of the questions that we raised about all the different people selling him. I'll come back to that in a short while. But the word, this katones pasim, is the same word for karpas, which comes from Megillas Esther, which describes the tapestries that the king Achashverosh put up when he had the party. He had a 180-day party, he had another 7-day party, and in that party he put up incredible tapestries. One of them was this thing called karpas, this fabric called karpas. Where else do we know karpas from? Pesach Seder. What on earth has a boiled potato or a piece of parsley got to do with a fine woolen tunic? We're getting there, slowly. So, remember, the brothers dipped Yosef's tunic in blood. We dip karpas in salt water. Dip, a double dipping. Why did we go down to Egypt? Because Yosef was sold to Egypt. Therefore, we went to Egypt. The beginning of the exodus of Egypt started with the brothers dipping Yosef's tunic in blood. The karpas on the Pesach Seder, that needs to be what we say. Why do we dip this karpas in salt water? To keep the children involved. Great, that's on a children's level. On an adult's level, we need to know, why did we go down to Egypt in the first place? Because the brothers hated Yosef, because Yosef was sold eventually to Egypt. Now, throughout the Parsha, we talked about Hashem. Obviously, Hashem orchestrated all of this, and Yosef would have gone down to Egypt if the brothers sold him or not. They are responsible for it. But it's all Hashem. But that's the connection between this week's Parsha, the coat, and this whole Pesach Seder. So when we get to our Seder next year, we take that boiled apple or parsley or whatever we have. Boiled apple, sorry. I'm thinking joining Rosh Hashanah and honey. Boiled potato. And we dip it. We should have a 3-hour discussion just on this alone, this concept. That should be our Seder. We went down to Egypt. Why did we go down? Oh, we went up, and the whole Exodus should be the other 3 hours of the Seder. Now we're at midnight. We fulfilled our obligation.
Is there a famine already?
We'll get there. That's next week's Parsha. Yes, I told it last year, I think. But no, maybe not in this year. I didn't tell it in this year. Okay, so remind me before Pesach and we'll discuss it again. But if you come to my Pesach Seder, we discuss that every single year in a slightly different way. Because the Seder, the Haggadah, the book, is a framework, it's a guideline. We need to take it and pull it apart and go behind the scenes, and that's what we're trying to do now. So now we're going to go behind the scenes in some understanding of a little bit of the Chumash and the way we understand it. So using the not so holy ChatGPT, we're going to look at some understanding of the verses. So let's start with what this young man asked my friend. In the book of Exodus, in Shmois, in Parshas Bo, we have the Jewish people are given their very first mitzvah as a nation, Rosh Chodesh, and then we're told to bring the Pesach offering. So we're told, HaChodesh hazeh lachem Rosh HaChodashim, this is the new month, the new moon, this is how you're going to celebrate Rosh Chodesh, and then speak to all the children of Israel, on the 10th of the month, take yourself for every man a kid, a lamb or a kid, etc., etc., goes through the whole explanation of what it should be. And in verse 9, it says, in verse 8 it says, V'achlu es habasa balayla hazeh, they should eat the flesh on that night. Sli esh, roasted over fire. Umatzos al merorim yochlelu, with matzos and bitter herbs they shall eat it. Don't eat it partially roasted or cooked in water, only roasted over fire. The next verse 9 says, its head, its legs with its innards, not leave anything over till the morning, and anything left of the morning burn in fire. Clearly there it says it has to be roasted and not cooked. Tick, according to our tradition. And if we look in what Rashi says on that, and I'm not going to look inside Rashi, I'm relying on ChatGPT to tell me Rashi because I did a whole play around with it. Rashi explains, roasted with fire, that the lamb must be roasted entirely in fire, not boiled or cooked in water, to fulfill the explicit commandment in the Torah. Rashi comments that matzah and maror accompany the lamb as part of the mitzvah commandment, highlighting the symbolic significance in recalling both the haste of the Exodus and the bitterness of the slavery, which is what we bring out. Okay. Don't eat it raw, not in boiled water. Rashi explains that boiling the lamb or cooking it by any other method other than direct fire is forbidden. This highlights the unique preparation required for the Passover sacrifice, distinguishing it from ordinary meals. Okay, we'll leave it there on that Rashi. Now, let's go to the King James Version of the Bible for Exodus 8 and 9. Shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Eat not of it raw nor sodden at all with water, but roast with fire, its head, its legs, etc. What we have, okay. The New International Version, I don't know what all of these are. That same night, they to eat the meat roasted over fire. The English Standard Version, they shall eat the flesh that night roasted on the fire with unleavened bread, bitter herbs, etc. There's 8 or 9 different versions. The Amplified Bible, eat the meat that night roasted in the fire. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled in water. Takeaways from the comparison. Consistency in roasting. All versions emphasize roasting the lamb over fire and prohibit boiling or eating it raw. Okay, that's Shmois. Right, let's go to Devarim. Re'eh, Parshas Re'eh. Parshas Re'eh discusses the Shalosh Regalim, the 3 pilgrim festivals. We read this on the 8th day of Pesach, on 2nd day of Shavuos, and on Shmini Atzeres. On Shmini Atzeres we start earlier, but this is the reading of Yomim Tovim that we do in Chutz La'aretz. It's not done in Eretz Israel because they don't have 2nd or 8th days. Pesach offering. Verse 7. Uvishalta va'achalta b'makom asher yivchar Hashem Elokecha boi v'tzminisa b'boker v'achle le'Elokecha. You shall roast it and eat it in the place that Hashem your God will choose. In the morning you may turn back and go to your tents. You shall roast it and eat it in the place that Hashem will choose, is the way the Torah always describes Yerushalayim, because this was 400 plus years before Yerushalayim was ours. King David bought Yerushalayim from the Jebusites. And so the Torah never calls it, well, it does call it Yerushalayim when we talk about Melchizedek, Shem, and Avraham, and they did go there, and the Kedes Yitzchak happened there, and Yaakov had his dream 2 weeks ago there as well, but it's never called directly Yerushalayim. We get hints to it, but it only becomes Yerushalayim under David HaMelech and Shlomo HaMelech when he builds the temple there. But it means you shall eat it in Yerushalayim, bring it in the temple. When the temple was in Shiloh, when the Mishkan was in Shiloh for 369 years off the top of my head, there's evidence today that they had many, many millions of lambs were slaughtered there. There's lamb bones all around where Mishkan Shiloh was. And so we found, because they were in the vicinity of it, which is what it's saying, the place Hashem will show you. But the ultimate place is Yerushalayim. We daven that we can bring the Korban Pesach again, Yerushalayim. Quite clearly there, it's telling us to roast it. And just look at what Rashi says on Devarim 16:7. You shall roast and eat it. Rashi explains that the word roasts, tzalisa, specifically means cooking over an open fire. He connects this command to the instructions for the Passover lamb in Exodus 12:8-9, where roasting with fire is explicitly mandated and boiling or cooking by other methods is prohibited. Roasting, no question whatsoever. Rashi adds, roasting here does not mean boiling or cooking in water, reaffirming the specific preparation method required. Very simple. You have to roast it. Okay, let's go to what ChatGPT tells us that the Christian Bibles say. King James, you shall roast and eat in its place. New International, roast and eat. English Standard Version, you shall cook it and eat it at the place the Lord your God would choose. Bishul, we use the word bishul, generally means to cook. But Rashi is telling us, yes, even though the Torah says bishul, go back and look what we saw at the beginning. We cannot learn Torah without Rashi. We cannot learn Torah without any Meforshim. New Living Translation, roast it. The Christian Standard Bible, you are to cook and eat it. King James, roast it. The Amplified Bible, page 3. Cook and eat it. Key observation, roast versus cook. Some translations use roast while others use cook. Both terms reflect the specific preparation of sacrificial meal. This young man clearly only read whichever version of his translation of the translation of the translation of the Torah that he had. Because remember, the Gemara tells us that King Ptolemy, take a step back, Alexander, we know him as Alexander the Great. The Gemara describes him as Alexander of Macedon, because that's where he came from. He's a Macedonian. He had conquered most of the world. He comes to the temple. He comes to conquer Jerusalem. The Kohen Gadol goes out wearing his big dakuna, priestly vestments, 8 garments, and Alexander jumps off his horse and bows down. And he says, everyone's saying, what's going on? You've come here, you walk through every place you go through, you just capture. And here he says, every time I go into battle, I know if I'm going to be victorious because this person, this picture of this person comes to me in a dream and blesses me. And therefore, how can I not? He's the one who's given me the victory. Anyway, Alexander died as a very young man. I think he was 32 or 33 when he died. He had taken over almost the entire known world. And he died, and the kingdom was split into 3. There was the Greek part of it, the Assyrian Greeks, and the Egyptian Greeks. The Assyrian Greeks are the ones that were the whole Hanukkah story came out of that. So we're talking about halfway through the Second Temple period, 200 or thereabout years before the Common Era. The Greek Empire were known as the Ptolemies. The kings or the leaders of the Greek Empire were Ptolemy. And one of the Ptolemies forced 70 rabbis into a secluded building with 70 separate rooms and forced them to translate the Tanakh into Greek. They made some adjustments. The Gemara brings all of them. Each of them in their own way made the adjustment. And when they all got together afterwards and they spoke about it, it was clearly by divine ordination, because every change that they made was consistent, was exactly the same. Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'haaretz. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth, is the way they translated it. What is in the beginning? That's not what Bereshis bara Elokim means. Art Scroll translates it. Sorry. a lot of pages before the beginning. In the beginning of God's creating the heaven and the earth. In the beginning, God created is not the way the words mean, but they couldn't say that in the beginning of God's creating heaven and earth. And there's a number of changes like that. And they translated many, many different things. Now, the standard, just as an aside, we're a week away from their festival, which was initially a Roman festival. According to most, was a festival called Saturnalia. According to most, the reason why they have mistletoe on their door is because a Roman soldier on one day in the year was allowed to abuse and rape any Jewish girl he found under a tree. That's where it comes from. That's where the history of these things come from. So where does the history of this virgin come from? Well, firstly, the Greek gods would come down from Mount Olympus and procreate with women, virgins, and the product of those relationships would be demigods, the Minotaur, the Centaur, etc. So we have this in their religion already. When the early Christian church was going around and bringing others into the church, they said, oh, you kill people under mistletoe, you rape people under mistletoe trees, come into our religion, and we'll make it that you kiss a girl under mistletoe. We're not so good about killing. Thou shalt not kill is one of the commandments. So you accept that, we'll do that. Or you have a tree, bring your tree into the house. Or each group brought in their pagan worship into it and made it their religion. The one issue that they've got is in Isaiah, there's a verse that says a young maiden, from the Hebrew, a Nara, will have a child. That's the interpretation, that the verse they use for virgin birth, because in ancient Greek, the word for Nara, a young girl, and the word for Basula, a virgin, is one word. There's not two separate words. So when you translate it, you can look at it as either a young girl or a virgin. Well, we use virgin, they say, and therefore that's the virgin birth. And the Greek gods came down from Olympus, and therefore let's marry the two together and bring them into our religion. One mistranslation after another. Let's put it that way. Okay, so roast versus cook, we've got this problem, and some of them clearly say cook. So this young man is not wrong based on what he knows. Okay, let's go right now all the way to the very last book of the Tanakh. Oh, before we get there, so King Yoshia, King Josiah, is brought in the book of Kings, in Malachim. Towards the end, he's one of the last kings. He was I think the fifth last king before the destruction of the first temple. Yes. And so if we look in the book of Kings, what do we know about him? So we know that he was 8 years old when he became the king. His father was the king before him. His father was Ammon, and the way that Tanakh describes it, Ammon was 22 years old when he became king. He reigned for 2 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name that brings, he did what was evil in the eyes of Hashem, as Manasseh, his father, had done. Manasseh was known as the most evil king. And so this is a grandson of King Manasseh. He is 8 years old when he becomes king. There's not a single Torah scroll in the land. And that is complete idolatry in the land of the Jewish people. The temple service seems to be going on some way or other, but this king is now Ben Shmona Shana Yoshiyahu b'Malcha. When Yoshia was 8 years old, he became king. He arose to become the king, and he reigned for 31 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Yedida, the daughter of Adaiah. It brings the names. Why it brings the names? They must have had a role in keeping him on the right path, or bringing him onto the right path. It happened in the 18th year of his reign that basically they found a Torah scroll. They went to the Kohen Gadol, collect the money, and he basically read from the Torah scroll, and he had this incredible revelation. He realized, hang on, we have lost the plot completely, and he brought the Jewish people back to Egypt. They discovered a book, a Torah scroll, and the whole prophecy with Huldah, and this is the Haftorah of second day Pesach. He seals a new covenant, and he basically has a Pesach like they've never had before. It says, unprecedented Pesach. The king then commanded the people, saying, perform the Pesach offering unto Hashem your God, as it's written in the book of the covenant, for such a Pesach offering has not been celebrated since the days of the judges who judged Israel, and all the days of the kings of Israel and kings of Yehuda. But in the 18th year, Pesach was celebrated unto Hashem in Yerushalayim. Just what we got? 3 verses extracting the Pesach. But then when we go to Divrei Hayamim, to Chronicles, remember Chronicles just sets out the life and times of everybody from Adam Harishon until the destruction of the temple, basically, till the king's Zedekiah, as they say in English, Sidkiyahu, he was the last king. So it says here that verse 11, Vayishtachu hapasach vayizruku hakonim. They slaughtered the Pesach offering. The Kohanim threw the blood, which they had taken from their hands, from the Levites who were flaying the animals. They removed the parts that were offered up in order to give the Pesach offering to the family groups of the people, to offer before Hashem, as written in the book of Moshe, and similarly for cattle that they offer up. Okay, then verse 13. V'yibashlu ha-Pesach ba'esh. They cooked the Pesach over the fire. Kamishpat hakadashim bishlu besiros vadim v'selachos, etc. Well, finish the pasuk. Yaritzu l'chol b'nei ha'am. They cooked the Pesach offering over fire according to the law. And they cooked the sacrificial meat in pots and cauldrons and pans and distributed quickly to all the populace. Cooked the other offerings. The previous verses had spoken about the other offerings, because every Yom Tov we bring on Pesach, we bring Korban Pesach and Korban Chagiga. That's where we get that we say Chag Sameach from the Korban Chagiga. And on Pesach we bring, and all the Yom Tov we bring a Chagiga, but on Pesach we bring a Korban Pesach. So they roasted it according to the law, and they also cooked the other offerings. So if we go to Chronicles according to Christian Bibles, the King James Version, they killed the Passover and the priest sprinkled the bloods. They removed the burnt offerings. They roasted the Passover with fire according to the ordinance, but the other holy offerings sod they in pots and in cauldrons and pans. The New International, they've roasted it. The Standard Version, they roasted the Pesach offering, and they boiled the holy offerings in pots. So most versions highlight the Passover and the boiling of the other offerings, but variations like pots and pans and things with things. There's clearly confusion. So it seems like you can interpret it that they roasted it and they boiled it. Quite easy to see how we can get it wrong. Very, very simple to see that. It's not mainly roasted. It is only roasted. We're only allowed to roast the Korban Pesach. That's correct. So Rashi says in Chronicles, now Rashi on Tanakh, on the Nach part of it, is a little bit more brief than he is in the Torah, but he says they roasted the Pesach offering with fire. They roasted the Pesach offering with fire according to the law, according to what we're supposed to do. Rashi links this to the mitzvah in Shmos, which we learned, where the Torah explicitly requires the Pesach offering to be roasted over fire, not boiled or cooked in any other way. Rashi differentiates between the Pesach lamb that was roasted and other peace offerings, shlamim, that were part of the festival, but not specifically the Pesach lamb. These could be boiled or cooked. The boiling of other offerings reflect normal procedure for sacrificial meat, not bound by roasting requirement. So quite clearly, without understanding what the Torah is telling us, we can very, very easily misunderstand what's going on. And so, as I said, Joseph and his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat potentially they possibly did use, they must have used midrashic sources. They possibly had rabbis consulting on it. What kind of rabbis, I don't know. But from what I remember, they probably got it reasonably right. But you could see how they could get it very, very wrong just by looking at the words of the Torah. So most mitzvahs, in fact, almost every mitzvah, we would not know how to do the mitzvah without the oral Torah telling us how to do it. What Rashi is bringing as a commentator. Now, Rashi, I think I said last week, he lived from 1040 to 1105, morning playtime. That's how you remember when Rashi lived. Rashi is the first commentator that we have that takes Midrashim and takes Gemaras and from all over, because the way the Gemara works is Gemara is discussing a concept and it says, oh, by the way, this verse we can use to understand this, and this is the understanding of that verse. Rashi brings that understanding and puts it into the Torah, whether it's in the Gemara, whether it's in the Midrash, or other sources. That's really Rashi's job. Rashi's job is to just give us the simple pshat, the simple meaning of every verse. Now, there are rabbis who will disagree with Rashi in some places, not in all places, Ramban being one of the primary ones. Ramban lived a couple of hundred years after Rashi. But occasionally he will say, with all due respect to Rashi, I don't understand it this way, I understand it that way. Now, it says that there are 70 facets to the Torah. Every single word in Torah can be understood in 70 different ways. But Hashem says, where you have a machloikas, we have a dispute in the Gemara, and there are lots and lots of disputes as we go through the Gemara, and there's no dispute as to the Torah law. The law brought down in the Torah, there's no dispute whatsoever. What are the disputes about? How far are we allowed to carry on Shabbos? We know we're not allowed to carry outside an Eruv, or how far are we allowed to walk on a Shabbos? Yeah, this one's learned it this way, this one's got a tradition that way. And what does Hashem do? Hashem sits there and he says, Elu va'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. These and those are both the words of the living God. They are both my words. It's the way we interpret things. It's the way we got a tradition handed down. There's lots of different ways of understanding things. Now, as we've got halacha settled as we've gone through the ages, in historic times, until soon after the Second Temple was destroyed, we had a Sanhedrin. People had a dispute how to interpret the law. They went to the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin discussed it, and they brought down psak halacha. That's how we do it. As the Sanhedrin, after the destruction and the Roman persecution, the Sanhedrin fell apart, obviously, and therefore we didn't have that anymore. And so the discussions were now, well, I've got this tradition and I've got that tradition. They're both right because we've got it right, and it comes back to the 12 tribes. You know, we daven. If I walk into a Svadi shul, the davening is a little bit different to Ashkenaz shul. If I walk into a Hasidic shul, it's a little bit different to a regular Ashkenaz shul. Just take the Shmona Esrei, the Amidah that we say. There's 19. It's called Shmona Esrei, meaning 18, but an extra brocha was added in. Those brochas were written by the Anshe Knesset Hadolah, men of the Great Assembly at the time, end of the Second Temple. They said, right, people are getting further away. We need to write down something. We need to put in place. People haven't got that ability to daven perfectly, purely from their heart. They need to have a structure. So they set down a structure for tefillah. What did they set down? You need to have these 18 and then became 19 blessings. This is the theme of the blessing, and this is the last line of the blessing. The rest of it you can still ad-lib. And so Svardim became handed down ad-libbing. The middle part is all the exact same theme. The words are almost the same, but there's subtle differences. But the brocha itself in every single case is exactly the same. And same thing with benching. The brochas of benching, the first three blessings, and then the fourth one, the words are exactly the same of the blessing, the Baruch Atah Hashem. The rest of it, there's some differences just because of nuances, because of the way we handed things down. The way I was taught to look at it is, you looking at this book, you seeing, what's that, 3 centimeters by 25. Dennis is looking at this book and he's seeing 10 by 25, but it's the same book. You just seeing that part of it and he's seeing that part of it. So how do you describe the book? Oh, it's 10 by 25. And how do you describe this 3 by 25? No, but it's the same thing. It's just perspective. And so what Rashi's job here is to bring us perspective, to show us that the words of the Torah are there as the Torah itself, but it comes along with an oral understanding. The Gemara is explaining the Torah. Without the oral understanding, we would never know what a mezuzah is. Al mezuzos beisecha uvisharecha. You shall put mezuzahs. Well, no, because you should put doorposts. Mezuzah means doorpost on your houses and on your gates. Well, what's a mezuzah? What does it mean? Where do I put it? What is it? Well, no, we need the oral law to tell us that it is a piece of parchment that contains certain verses, Shema, V'ahavta, it contains certain things, and you shall put it on the right-hand doorpost going into your rooms. And which rooms you put it on, and which ones with the bracha, which ones without a bracha. And a whole range of halachas just on one. Well, what is parchment? Who says right? Maybe I can just print it on a laser printer. Might last longer. Whatever, all of these things needed to be the oral law. To fill in, put it, bind it on your hand or tie it on your hand and put it between your eyes. So I must put it, whatever it is, on my hand, tie it around my hand, put it between my eyes. The Tzaddukim did that. The Sadducees, at the time of the Second Temple, end of the Second Temple, that's what they did for their tefillin, apparently. But how did they even know what tefillin were? The Torah calls them toitafos. We need Rashi to tell us what those words mean. And so without the oral tradition, without the oral Torah, we got two parts of the Torahs. There's two Torahs, which are one. And so that's what Rashi's job is. Now, we've kind of run out of time, and I haven't discussed any Rashis in this week's Parsha. So let's just jump towards the end. In fact, let's just jump to the very, very end. Let's just go to Rashi's. What am I going to look at? You know what? Let's just go to the very, very last verses in the Parsha. Because we're left with hanging on the edge of a cliff, waiting for Joseph, for Yosef to be let out of jail. And he's still in jail. Now we know next week's Parsha he's going to be let out of jail. But this week we don't know that. Okay, so the last pasuk says, "V'loy zachasar hamashkin es Yosef vayishkachehu." The chamberlain of the cupbearers did not remember Yosef, and he forgot him. Why on earth is the Torah saying he didn't remember him, and he forgot him? So Rashi says, "V'lo zachasar hamashkin boy bayom." It didn't remember him on that day. The day he was let out, he told him. He forgot straight away. They bring out Tosfos Hashalim says the day he was reinstated to his position. So he came out. He was supposed to straight away. Rashi basically takes a word or a phrase in the verse. So the first one he says, "V'lo zachasar hamashkin." The chamberlain, the cupbearers didn't remember, and he says on that day. And then he says, "Vayishkachehu," he forgot him. So Rashi is quoting that word, very last word of the Parsha, and he says, "La'achamikan," and afterwards. So not only did he forget him that day, he forgot him afterwards. Why? So basically, what happened is he would see, and this happens to all of us all the time. He would make a mental note. I must remember Joseph. That Hebrew, that Jew boy. We'll see next is Parsha. He calls him this Jew boy. I must remember what he said. Hang on. So he put on a thing around his wrist when he went to sleep that night. Because after he left Paro was already asleep. He's making the wine for the next day. Ooh, Jew boy, jail. Put this thing on his wrist. Wake up the next morning and the thing on his wrist had fallen off. And so he didn't remember. And he came back that night and so on and so forth. So, okay. And afterwards, Mipnei Shetala boy Yosef, since Yosef depended on him, the Zachro to remember him, whose Kaklios Asor, he had to remain imprisoned, Shtei Shnanim, 2 more years, because it's Shenema, Asher Agev, fortunate is a man, Asher Sam Hashem Miftachai, who's placed his reliance on Hashem, the Lord Panaes Havim, and not turn to arrogant ones. This is an arrogant kind of guy, meaning Velo Batach al Mitzrayim, he didn't rely on Egypt. Hakruya Rahav, he's called arrogant one, which are called arrogant people. So Rashi is telling us. So Yosef said, make sure that you remember me, and make sure that you don't forget, or make sure you don't forget me, and make sure you don't remember me. He used two words too many. He didn't rely on Hashem. Now remember, and I did emphasize this a few times, when Yosef came to Paro's house, it says, verse 2, verse 3, Vayar Adonav ki Hashem itoi kol asher hu oise Hashem matzliach biyadoi. His master saw that Hashem was with him, and that he would do Hashem, and all that he would do, Hashem would make successful in his hands. So he saw he's successful. Rashi says, Ki Hashem ito, Hashem was with him. Shem shamayim shegaru befiv, the name of Hashem was fluent in his mouth. How are you this morning, Yosef? Baruch Hashem. What's going on? Chaste Hashem, thank God. Everything he said was, it's all because of Hashem. Hashem did this, Hashem did that. That's what he saw. That's all that he had. Everything that Yosef did was with Hashem. He said, they saw that in jail, they saw that Hashem was with him. Just before, he was in custody, Hashem was with him. It says there, just before when he was sent to jail, prison warden did not scrutinize anything that was in his custody because Hashem was with him. Rashi says on that, but Asher Hashem ito, that Hashem was with him. This means Bishvil shehashem itoi, that Hashem was with him. Everything that he did was with Hashem, with him. He didn't forget Hashem in anything. He realized. But then, at the last minute, when he had the opportunity to rely on Hashem, daven to Hashem, unfortunately, at Yosef's level, he slipped. And he used two extra words. So he was kept in jail for 2 more years. And we're going to get to next week's Parsha, which starts by Vayihi Mikach Nasayim Yamim. It was happened at the end of 2 years, to the day, because it was Paro made a birthday party. Paro was dreaming, and we have Paro's 2 dreams. We had 2 dreams. We had 2 V'yama'ens. He refused. Yaakov refused. Yosef refused. The reason why Yosef refused, interesting enough, as Rashi brings there, is he saw his father's reflection in the window. He looked into the window and he saw his father standing there, and he said, how can I do this to my father? If we think about it, what did he actually see? He had aged. He'd been there for many years already, and he saw himself. He suddenly was bearded, and it's brought that Yosef looked exactly like his father. And he saw his own reflection in the window, and he looked into that and he said, hang on, how can I let my father down? I look like my father. How can I let him down? He saw his reflection in the window. Yehuda came to Yaakov and said, Hakena, do you recognize these things? And Tamar came to Yehuda and said, recognize these 3 items of the man who did this to me, who made me pregnant. There's so many twos. They broke bread twice. There's all these twos flowing through the Parsha, and we end with these twos. Always need to remember there's 2 parts to the Torah. There's the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah, and the Torah Shebitzav. The Torah is not a document written on a scroll, rolled up and put in the ark. The Torah needs to be a living thing. We need to live Torah. And the only way we can live Torah is by going through and understanding what do the words actually mean. And the only way we can understand what the words actually mean is not relying on ChatGPT, but relying on the Gemara, the Mishnah, the Gemara, the Mefarshim, the halacha brought down in Shulchan Aruch, and the volumes and volumes and volumes after that to explain it all is what we have. We have 2 parts of a Torah which are one. We need to rely on both. Everyone should have a wonderful week.